All right, Mr. Henry Agbonika joins us next. He's a development strategist. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Development consultant. Mr. Agbonika, thank you for coming on today. There still are several schools of thought in terms of how we are doing at the moment, whether or not the first phase of this easing of lockdown is turning out well or not. What do you think?
Thank you so much, Chamberlain, for having me. Well, I would say so far so good. There's nothing happening now that we didn't anticipate would happen. You know, the first phase of the ease of lockdown, a number of us anticipated that, Nigerians will come out in their numbers after the lockdown. We anticipated that Nigerians might not obey the regulations and the safety protocols. So whatever is happening now shouldn't be new, to observers within the space. It's something that, was clearly obvious would happen.
That's not entirely correct, is it?
Pardon?
When you say might not obey, that is not entirely correct. Is that the case?
Okay, why do you say so?
You don't see people complying with the measures on your way to the studio this morning, even before today? No compliance? You haven't seen anyone complying?
Well, and that's why I use the word might, The level of compliance is the issue. You would expect that considering the situation at hand, considering the urgency, considering the magnitude of the pandemic we have at hand, you would expect that most Nigerians would latch onto those protocols, would latch onto those guidelines as if their lives depended on it. But that's not what we are seeing. Of course, there are instances of Nigerians observing. Of course, I did. I wore my face masks in here. I use sanitizer, observe social distancing as much as possible. But we have not gotten to that level. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say we're probably 4.5 thereabout.
What level of compliance did you expect? And break it down across board.
Pardon me?
What level of compliance did you expect?
Okay, so first of all, market. Let's look at places of engagement. You would expect that if you go to the market now, for instance, if you go into any market space in Nigeria, for instance, at the moment, what you'll find is chaos. It's still the normal chaos. But I expected that the rules of engagement at this point should be different. I expected that people would understand what is at hand, the situation at hand, and, probably observe those protocols much more than they are doing at the moment. So there's room for considerable improvement, right? There's room for considerable improvement. But that's not to say there is no effort on ground. Of course, people are trying. Again, it's not something we're used to. It's something very, very new. It's a lifestyle. It's more of a lifestyle now, So Nigerians would have, to get used to it somehow, and hopefully we adapt to it.
Earlier on, you also said that, this is something we anticipated, from the figures spiking to the easing of the lockdown. You basically painted a picture that we saw into the future, and we had at least a somewhat clear picture of where we'll be right now. But the question is, if we anticipated it, why do we seem to be grappling with issues of compliance, for example? If we anticipated that there will be issues with compliance, then we should have put measures in place way ahead of time to ensure that people have a good understanding. We know the kind of people we have. So why do we seem to be grappling with it if we anticipated it that much?
Okay, so of course, there are measures in place. We've had various state governors. We've had the PTF. Severally, we've had various state governments come out, to reel out several measures in place to ensure that people observe all of these protocols. Again, it's one thing to reel out measures. It's one thing to reel out the protocols. And it's another thing for people to observe them, right? For people to respect them as well. And I also do not grudge the people entirely. Again, we have a population where people depend. Nigerians are basically hustlers, right? We're street people. A number of us are street people. And you also have a situation whereby people need to earn their livelihoods. So how do you expect that, amidst all of these challenges, people would all of a sudden just begin to adapt, to all of these protocols in as much as their lives depend on it? So Nigerians need time. Nigerians need time. Nigerians need constant enlightenment. We need to review our engagement and dissemination strategy in such a way that we make room for a more robust, community-driven process in all of this. As it is currently, it's more of a top-down situation. Nigerians just hear this thing. But if we hand over control to the various communities, I would expect that we'll get much more result. But honestly, we need to give Nigerians more time to get used to it. On a daily basis, the radios, the televisions, the various community heads, community channels, we must engage Nigerians.
Well, this perhaps, in a way, answers my question, but not in specific terms. So on the one hand, you projected that this would happen, that would have very low compliance of the regulations that government has put out. And you have also said that we're close to average in our compliance. What do you think is responsible for the low compliance? And was there anything in your projection that we could have done to stave off the kind of low compliance that's playing out right now?
Okay, so I would say perhaps if we had our engagement, like I alluded to earlier, stakeholder engagement is critical in all of this process, right? If we had looked critically into the stakeholder engagement plan, if we had engaged more with the first of all, identified the right stakeholders. You see, in all of this, how involved is the NURTW in all of this? How involved is NATO in all of this? How involved are the churches and the mosques in all of this? And again, these people have one of the most effective channels of communication you can ever think of, probably much more effective than that of government. But how well did we engage with them? In such a way that they can draw down most of the protocols, safety protocols of government, and break it down in such a way that their people can understand. And so it is critical that we revisit, our stakeholder engagement plan critically, identify the right, set of stakeholders we need to engage with going forward in this, second phase of the easing, and engage appropriately. I believe that the issues associated with interstate violation of interstate rules on interstate movement, if we deal appropriately, we engage appropriately with NURTW, NATO, and all of those stakeholders who we think might not have influence or might not have, the power to, control their people. We will be shocked that these organizations are self-regulating. The ER lodgers in the market, where have we placed them? How have we engaged with them? It's not enough for us to, as chief executives of the various states, sit down and say, okay, we expect you to do this. These are the regulations. No, you hand over control to the people. Let it be a participatory process. Let the people be involved. Let the people who we want compliance from be involved in the process as well, so that in such a situation, they can also self-regulate their members. Trust me, in any typical market, the ER lodger should be the female head of the market or so, will do everything possible to ensure that, whatever protocols they have adopted from the NCDC guidelines and safety protocols, would be adhered to by operators in the market and visitors as well. So it is time we revisit our stakeholder engagement strategy, going into the second phase of the ease of lockdown. Because trust me, the PTF and all of these other organizations, high-level organizations at the federal level have done their bits, or rather they are doing their bit and they are doing it amazingly well if you ask me. But the subnationals need to pull down.
Okay. Interestingly,
them pulling down. The enforcement of these regulations, lies with the subnationals.
Okay.
But how well they will do it is dependent on how well they are able to engage with the people.
One moment. Interestingly, some of these markets that you mentioned are, taking some of these precautions with a temperature gun and all of that. But speak to the motivation for people leaving their homes in droves as you projected. Now, what do you think government could have done or should do to reduce the number of people pouring out of their homes in defiance of this lockdown? What do you think government could have done to reduce the chances of people pouring out?
Is there anything government would have really done, considering our population, considering...
You said the other time,
urban dwellings.
Just one moment. Just one moment. You said the other time that, people live by their daily means, okay? So They have been locked down for a considerable number of weeks, which, of course, has reduced a lot of the earnings that they may have saved off and all of that. So that's definitely one motivation that you said. Did your projections see that, and what could have been done to stave off people pouring out in defiance of these restriction guidelines?
Well, on the surface of it, you might say, okay, if government had provided enough palliative, it would have probably assuaged all of this and reduced, the number of people who come out, to hustle. It's like, opening the gates to a prison yard, and, all of the prisoners who have been starved of freedom for several years will jump out. So we'd expect that if the government of the day had provided enough palliatives, the palliative had gone round, people would not be in so much of a hurry to come out. But given the Nigerian context, we know where we are. Given the Nigerian context, it will be pretty much difficult to say that the government will be able to reach out to Nigerians that way. Do we have the structure to make that happen? Do we have the system to make that happen? So here we are in this given situation. What the government can do is just to let the people out. Once they come out, ensure some level of enforcement, not using force. Like I alluded to earlier on, let the communities lead the process of enforcement. That way, we can starve off, increased rate of infestation. But it will be pretty difficult. There's absolutely nothing much the government can do at this point to reduce the number of Nigerians that will step out. We cannot meet their needs.
You seem very confident now that we're moving to the next phase by saying, let the people out. I believe that might be the next phase. But I remember earlier on, you said Nigerians need time. Basically saying that, well, it hasn't sunk in for a lot of people, so they need time. You also said that, in terms of interface, you said that there should be more control given to stakeholders, as you put them. You mentioned NURTWs, the Yalojas, and the rest. And you mentioned some other things. So if you're saying let the people out in one breath, and the other, you had said that we're not quite ready in terms of, allowing this to percolate to Nigeria, and you said bottom up in some sense and giving control. Don't you think that's conflicting in some way?
No, of course, it's not conflicting. We learn by practice, right? Experiential learning. And this is not a situation that we have found ourselves before. This is a new one, And so we keep learning on the day. We keep learning. We make progress. We make mistakes. But we keep learning on the day, daily. But that's not to suggest that because we do not know what lies ahead, because we cannot say that, okay, of a setting that because we cannot control Nigerians from coming out, we keep them indoors. No. Let Nigerians come out. We need to keep this economy running. If people do not earn a livelihood, it could kill them faster than coronavirus.
Absolutely.
So we need to keep this running. We need to keep them out and ensure that, like I had said initially, that my solution to all of this is to revisit our engagement and dissemination strategy at the sub-national levels. And so if we engage well, if we have a correct dissemination plan, knowing what and how to communicate with the various levels of audience, that way perhaps we would achieve more result.
Okay,
For me, I do not see us keeping people at bay, keeping them back at home. It won't work.
That's understandable. But if you've seen the figures we're recording in the country, and by the way, we've not started seeing the figures from this easing of lockdown, which is entering its second week right now. We've not started seeing those figures. So if you say that let the people out, and like I said earlier on, you alluded to the fact that we might not be quite ready for ensuring that everybody complies. The challenge here is, aren't we at the risk of recording more cases because a lot of people are not complying? That's the challenge here. If we let the people out, won't we stand the risk of recording cases exponentially, overwhelm the systems, and then go back to square one?
Okay, so I understand you perfectly, right? There's a likelihood the numbers might increase, and there's a likelihood the numbers might not increase the way we think they would increase. And so what I have been looking at in all of this is not the new levels of infection, really. What I've been looking at is our ability to manage, those that have been infected and the number of deaths. Okay, as of 11th of May, our death rate was about 3.2%. 3.2%. Recovery rate was about 19 point something percent. When you compare that, of course, with the African average, regional average, it's a bit high. South Africa's death rate is about 1.9%. So at 3.2%, it's quite high. But considering where we are coming from as well, I think it's not bad. We're putting up a good fight. So these guys who are managing, the frontline health workers who are doing all of this, are working hard to ensure that the death rate, is kept low, that, and we discharge more people. So we need to focus more on that. We need to focus our energy more on ensuring that people are well treated, the recovery rate increases rapidly, and the number of deaths is kept at bay. As of, the number of infections, let's hope that government gets it right, acts right, and they're working hard at it, right, to ensure increased testing. Once we can achieve increased testing, and build the capacity of our system and our people to effectively treat people that have been infected and reduce the death rate significantly, we are home and clear.
They'll always tell you that hope is not a strategy. That you have to work towards it and ensure that things happen. When you say that there's nothing more that the governments can do, many may not be able to connect with that because they see what's happening globally, how this caught everybody by surprise, and they've seen the response from different governments. How then do you say there's nothing the governments can do?
Okay, so if I may ask, what do we expect the government to do? The government has paid palliatives. If you ask me, insignificant, but considering the constraint of resources, and we must be honest with ourselves, right? The only source of earnings, the major source of revenue for this nation has gone south. Crude oil prices have crashed. So how do we intend that government handles that? How do we intend, and this is me being very, very realistic, and this is not about hope, this is about realism. I'm a realist. And so where do we expect that government will get all of that from? We must also understand that coming to this point, we do not have any, solid system in place to even ensure that we're able to reach out to a vast majority of Nigerians. We can see what's happening with the palliatives, the social investment program, the payment of conditional cash transfer or palliatives to the poorest of the poor. It's not a good outing, if you ask me. So when we consider this reality that we find ourselves, it is based on this reality that I say there's pretty much nothing much the government can do. The government is doing its bits daily, and you can't take it away from them that they are committed to this fight. The PTF has demonstrated it severally that they are committed to this. But as it is, in terms of stopping Nigerians, using whatever measure to motivate them to stay back at home, it's a lot of work, and we cannot even afford it right now. And so based on where we are, this most realistic position that we are, what is the way forward? The way forward for me is that we of course, Nigerians let the people keep coming out, but we keep encouraging them to ensure that they observe the minimum standards of social distancing, they observe the minimum standard of safety protocols.
I just wonder
this is not the time. Of course, I just wonder what right,
those who are running businesses, maybe the SMEs, some of those businesses that are bleeding at the moment, who are looking up to the authorities to demonstrate perhaps a little more direction, clarity, and leadership in terms of several stimulus packages. I'm just wondering what goes through their minds when they hear you say that there's nothing that the government can do. Then they'll ask you, so why do we have a government if it's not to find solutions to the problems that exist? Because when they scramble to compete or vie for elections, they tell you all sorts of things. So how do you want them to take your word to the bank that there's nothing government can do?
Okay, Chamberlain, so this is a different question. This is different from the people. SMEs, the sustenance of SMEs is different from people coming out. And so we've heard a lot from the CBN governor, Emefiele, in recent times about their plans, for the SMEs to ensure that Nigeria's economy remains afloat. So in that regard, the government is doing something. The government is doing a whole lot when it comes to, ensuring, it comes to monetary and fiscal policy. A lot has been said. And a lot will be said in the days ahead. Okay,
well, if you say the government has done a lot,
Nigerians coming out in their droves, day-to-day living. But when it comes to SMEs,
could you just be a little more specific and clarify, if you could just highlight for those who may not know, what is government strategy then, since you tend to know a lot that they're doing so much, what is their strategy to getting funds to the informal sector? Because we have a huge informal sector here, and those are part of the people who, if they don't go out there to get things running on a daily basis, You can't tell them to stay at home and they got families to feed. So tell us about that.
Good. Well, again, we've also always known that the informal sector constitutes, a large chunk of our economy. And I'm aware that plans are underway by government to engage, to support this informal sector. Again, like I had said earlier on, we
must before you move on to the next
base
one.
our decisions, our
You
discussions.
say you're aware that plans are underway to engage those people. What specific plans?
I cannot say. I'm not a spokesperson for government, right? But like I had said earlier on, assuming plans are ongoing.
I understand your point. The part where you say you are aware the plans are underway. So what are those plans?
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
Well, I don't know specifically, and I cannot say specifically because I'm not a spokesperson of government, right?
So how
but
come? Are you talking about what you don't know?
Alluded to earlier. Hold on. Like I had alluded to earlier, the reality of our situation right now, it will make it more difficult for the government to even engage with them, regardless of government's plan, regardless of government's commitment towards them. It will not happen immediately. Do we have a database of the informal sector? How much of the informal sector where are they? Of course, we might know where are they, but have we captured them in some sort of formal net?
So who's to blame for that?
You must understand
the people?
The constraint government is faced with right now.
No, I'm trying to get that point.
And
so if we don't have a database,
results,
if we don't have a database of those people, who's to blame?
Yeah. Of course, it's the responsibility of government, but it is an issue that has always been on the ground. And so this presents perhaps an opportunity for us to resolve this issue, for us to have a database. But you and I know. And again, that's why I belong to the realist school. It's not about, the ideal thing. You're talking about the ideal situation. But in this context that we're in, with the issues we're grappling with, we must face reality. That if government is going to reach out to the informal sector, that is a whole lot of work. And so
because government did say that.
Intervention.
Just a minute, I hope you can hear me. Well, they did also say that, they didn't know that our health sector was this bad. They've talked about the challenges that the health sector is facing. So have you heard, and tell us if you have now, any specific policy or plan from government saying, look, in consideration of what we're going through now, having shown us up this much, the state of our health sector, this and that is what we're going to do so that this doesn't catch us unawares moving forward. Tell us about that plan. Have you heard government say that at any level?
Okay, so let me say this. You had just mentioned that someone had said that they're not aware that this is the extent of decay in the Nigeria's health sector. I think specifically Boss Mustafa, the SGF, had mentioned that. That for me was an aha moment. It was a moment of some sort of emotional purgation. And I'd expected that we will latch on it to ask the SGF that now that you know, what next? And so in the days ahead, we expect to see the engagement with the SGF going after that point should have been, Mr. Secretary, can we trust you enough to ensure that having come to this realization, which for me was good, that realization was good and perfect, but having come to this realization, what do we expect from you? That was the conversation we should have had 2-3 weeks back, not this morning. But somehow the conversation veered off to blame games and all of that. But I want to use this medium, to also speak to him that, Mr. Secretary, now that you have realized, and like Chamberlain has asked, what are the plans? The SGF is the secretary to the National Council on Reforms. As a secretary to the National Council of Reforms, it means that he's in a position to spearhead strategic reforms in the health sector.
Let's make this brief.
So we should be asking him, now that you have come to this realization, what next? Okay,
we're going to wrap up in less than 60 seconds, so let's make this short if you can. You talked about the PTF on COVID-19 having done well, incredibly well from your perspective. So what is it that they've actually done that made you say that? I mean, other than the briefing and advising the president.
Okay, so first of all, you don't see beyond the daily briefings? Okay, so let me say this. First of all, they have demonstrated, they have provided leadership to Nigeria's COVID-19 response. As seemingly small as that may be, they have provided high-level leadership. That is very important. And with the daily briefings as well, each day that we Nigerians see the secretary to the government of the federation, that we see the coordinator, we see all of those ministers. As much as we have issues with government sometimes, it gives us hope that these guys are working. Secondly,
Mr. Henry,
we're having a collaboration between government, the private sector, development and donor. Hold on, Chamberlain. I'm being realistic here.
Well, you know what time does? It doesn't hold on. It just keeps going, and we'll run out of it. So, but we do thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning. Henry Agbonika is a development strategist.
Thank you for having me, Chamberlain. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you guys.
Yeah. We're back in a moment. Join us again.